An ATR plane crashes to the ground, killing everyone on board. We're not talking about Brazil. We're going back in time to 1994 on this Taking Off podcast. Hello and welcome to the Taking Off podcast. I'm Dan Milliken.
And I'm Christy Schaefer, and we're talking about a fairly heavy topic. It's actually a hot topic.
It is a hot topic, and what we're referring to is the crash of the ATR near Chicago on Halloween of 1994. It's a hot topic today because of a recent ATR 72 crash in Brazil that was captured on a lot of people's cell phones and is just... it's stomach churning a video to watch. And a lot of people have jumped to the ATR in Brazil being icing.
Yeah, right.
And because the ATR has a reputation as having an ice problem, primarily because of the 1994 incident. And I think that we need to... I think that we need to tap the brake pedal a little bit on the icing for the Brazil crash. Because we don't know, and there's a lot of other things. And I think that the ATR is getting a bit bad rap when we don't know. It could be the pilot training. It could be all sorts of things in Brazil. But what we do know is the American Eagle ATR flight 4184 on Halloween of 1994. Christy, can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, so it was a flight being operated by American Eagle, which obviously is near and dear to my heart. They were going from Indianapolis to Chicago, and they had gone up. They were on their flight route, and they were given holding instructions, which is not uncommon, especially going into Chicago.
Right.
Especially with the weather that day. So they were in a little bit of a weather system, not thunderstorms or anything like that, but there was icing, PIREPs being given.
Yes. There was a small twin-engine light plane that reported rime icing.
Right, exactly. And I think they even said it was like light rime ice or something. So it wasn't a big...
Trace.
Right. It wasn't a big deal. And so this flight, for all intents and purposes, was a very normal, very standard flight, especially that time of year in that part of the country. And it's funny because you are correct. But everybody's jumping on icing, regarding this Brazil crash, but there are always contributing factors. And so, could the icing have been a factor in it? Absolutely. Just like in the American Eagle 4184 crash, it wasn't it wasn't the primary cause, but it definitely was a contributing factor to what happened. So they go into holding. And when you're in holding, you slow down typically a little bit. So they were slowed down and they were in holding. Well, when you do that, the pitch of the aircraft came up just a little bit. I think they were about 5 degrees nose high, and the flight attendants that were in the back trying to get the aircraft wrapped up for landing. So for those of you guys that are avid flyers, you know that the flight attendants will usually come through. They'll do their last check, make sure everybody's seat backs are upright, their tray tables are set, and pick up any last trash.
Well, and this is a very short flight.
Very short.
Cruising altitude was 16,000, right?
It was like 14,000, something like that. It was like 14 or 16.
It was in the teens.
Yeah, which is normal. But so they probably just did a quick service, and then they were just going through to wrap everything up.
Right.
But they were pitched up just a little bit, and as they were going into the turns of the hold, the pilots had commented on, we're just kind of, mushing around here, and it's probably really uncomfortable back there. So the first officer who was flying the airplane decided that, hey, you know what? If I put in 15 degrees of flaps, that should bring
the nose down and make it more comfortable.
Yeah, and that was routine. It wasn't anything that was, out of the ordinary or anything. And so
they did that, and it lowered the nose.
It did. It lowered the nose. They didn't realize that lowering the nose was going to have consequences, though, because what it did was it changed where ice was building up on the wing. They also didn't realize that they were no longer in a light rime ice situation. They were actually getting I think they were in SLD.
Yeah. So, okay, for those who don't know what SLD is, define that.
So it's basically the super cooled liquid droplets. It's basically where water is right there on the edge. Raindrops are right on the edge of being frozen, but they're not frozen yet because, frozen water is just ice, but if you're wet, you can stick to a surface, and because of that principle of sticking to the surface will actually cause it to freeze.
Adherence.
Exactly.
Yes. And so you can actually have temperatures of below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. You can have temperatures below and water still not freeze if it's just in the air.
Have you ever seen those videos on YouTube where people have the bottles of water and they, it's cold, or where they take it outside in the snow or whatever, and then they smack it or hit it and then it freezes
instantly. And
instantly freezes. And
that's what we're talking about. And that's SLD. That's they used to call it freezing rain.
Right.
But it's water that is super
yeah.
cooled, and on a kinetic, when it hits the airplane, it instantly becomes ice.
Right, exactly. Because now it has like condensation nuclei effectively to, make the freezing action happen. So anyway, they put 15 degrees of flaps in, the pitch of the airplane goes down a little bit, and now the ice starts to form a little bit behind the
boots,
the de-icing boots on the airplane.
Okay. And so let's talk about then the de-icing equipment on board this plane, the ATR.
Okay.
What, for those, again, that may not understand, what are boots and how do they work?
So the boots basically line the leading edges of the airplane. So when ice accretes on it, it's effectively filled with air and expands it, and it pops off the ice. It's actually really cool. When
I have them on my 210.
Yeah, okay. So when I flew the Citation, one of the models of Citation that I flew had the de-icing boots, and the captain I was flying with said, "Hey, watch this." We were going into Grand Junction, I think, and we were in a little bit of icing conditions. So I'm looking out at the wing, and he turned on the boots, and you could see them inflate a little bit, and all of a sudden the ice just goes puff, and it pops right off. And so it does that over and over. It inflates and then deflates, lets the ice build back up, inflates, deflates.
Right.
But on the ATR, it's a little bit different.
When the ice was building up just behind the boots.
Right, exactly. The ATR still
created
inflates.
a ridge.
Yeah, the ATR still has the de-ice boots, but it's got like an oscillating, instead of deflating kind of this way and horizontally.
Yeah.
It inflates and oscillates vertically.
Which is weird, but okay.
Well, I mean, and the thing is that it was still effective. But now, because of the pitch of the aircraft, the ice is coming, it's forming behind that boot. So now you can't get rid of it. And so they're in holding, and they were told to descend and maintain 8,000 feet. So they start to descend, and at the same time, they get a flap over speed warning.
Okay, so let's stop right here. We haven't really introduced the crew.
Okay.
So let's talk. Who was the pilot, and who was the captain? Who was the first officer?
So I have to pull up their names because I don't
Orlando
know it by
Aguilar
heart.
was the captain at 29 years old.
Yeah.
He had 8,000 hours of flight time.
They were very experienced.
Both of them were very experienced.
Yeah, I know that the captain had over 8,000 and the first officer had like 5,000.
5,000. And Jeff Gagliano, who was 30.
He was the pilot flying that day.
Correct. The first officer was pilot flying.
They were, from everything I've ever been told, I've flown with a lot of the lifers at Envoy,
Eagle,
which is Eagle. They knew this crew.
And they were good.
They were good crew. They were good crew. They were good guys. I actually flew with one of the captains I flew with last year. He knew them personally, and he had nothing but good things to say about them. Said that they were just a really, really good crew.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then there were 64 passengers on board, plus the 2 pilots and the 2 flight attendants, so a total of 68 people, which was standard for an ATR.
Okay, so they're in the hold. They're told to descend to 8,000.
Yes, they get a flap over speed warning.
But they were expecting that.
Right. Well, yeah. They mentioned. Yeah, I knew that was gonna. I figured that was gonna happen.
Or I think even before the captain had said, we will get an
flap
over speed warning.
So what they did, you get a flap over speed warning like that. The first officer decided, okay, well, I'm going to go now that we're descending and whatever. He decided to retract the flaps. And that's what sealed their fate, because when they did that, the aircraft started to pitch again. It pitched up. And now because of that ridge of ice that was built up, on the backside of the wing there, it disrupted the flow of air over it. And that caused the right wing effectively to stall, for lack of better description. What it did was it actually produced the center of lift behind where it was normally supposed to, which caused the aileron to deflect. It kicked off the autopilot because the autopilot could no longer overcome the force of pressure that was being put on the aileron. So now the aircraft starts to roll, the autopilot kicks
Suddenly
off.
and heavily roll to the right.
It rolled to the right, the autopilot kicks off, the pilots grab the flight controls, but the amount of pressure and force was just too great for them to overcome.
Over 70 pounds.
It was a lot. It was a lot of pressure that was being put
and
on
to go
it.
back on the center of lift, so as the relative wind comes over the camber of the wing, you get your high pressure, low pressure,
Right.
which is what causes lift.
Correct.
And there's a point of the center of lift that's like, imagine a force pulling up on the wing.
And it's usually more forward of
more
the wing.
forward on the wing. This ridge that had occurred right behind the boots disrupted the airflow, and actually the air then burbled, for lack of a better term, over that, the air reattached on the wing way back.
Right.
And so it still had lift, but now the center of lift was so far back, it was actually over the ailerons.
Correct.
So then when the ailerons move, that lift, it's an incredible force.
Right, absolutely. So, and that's effectively what wound up happening. So it caused that right aileron to deflect, which caused them to go into a roll, and they grabbed the controls, the flight controls, but it was just so much pressure they couldn't overpower it.
They did manage to recover
They
the
started
first one.
to. Yeah, they started to recover. They actually pulled out of it, but then it snapped again.
And went a lot further.
Interestingly, if you go back and read the report, they said there was a weird crunching sound in the CVR.
See, I think that was the tail.
Yeah, it could have been.
Because what happened then, when it rolled the second time, it was 11 seconds from that moment till impact. So 11 seconds, and toward the end of that, you hear the crunching sound, and they know that the tail broke off the plane.
Right. It landed about a mile away, right?
Landed about a mile away. So that's my thought, but who knows?
No, you're absolutely correct. It could be because it put so many stresses on the airframe when they went into that dive. It put the airplane into, a physical situation that it was never meant to be in.
Yeah, and actually both wings separated as well right before crash.
Oh wow, yeah. See, I forgot about that part, but yeah. So basically, it basically snapped and just kept rolling, and then they pulled out of it, but then it rolled again, and it went inverted, and then it just. They did say though, if the crew had another 2,000 or 3,000 feet, they might have actually been able to pull out of it, especially as they got out of icing conditions and that ice started to melt off. But they just didn't have
11 seconds.
Yeah, they did not have the altitude available, and they say that, but then the airframe. It was so overstressed that it started to come apart, and so I don't necessarily know if that is true, but that's just what I had read somewhere.
So I'm going to read the actual official probable cause from the NTSB. And this is a quote: probable causes of this accident were the loss of control attributed to a sudden and unexpected aileron hinge moment reversal that occurred after a ridge of ice accreted beyond the de-ice boots because, number one, ATR failed to completely disclose to operators and incorporate in the ATR 72 airplane flight manual and flight crew operating manual and flight crew training programs adequate information concerning the previously known effects of freezing precip on the stability and control characteristics, autopilot, and related operational procedures when the ATR 72 was operating in such conditions. That's number one. So it was on the company. They knew that it had some issues like this. Number two, the French Directorate General for Civil Aviation's inadequate oversight of the ATR 42 and 72 and its failure to take the necessary corrective actions to ensure continued airworthiness in icing conditions. And number three, the same thing, the French Directorate General's Civil Aviation failure to provide the FAA with timely airworthiness information developed from previous ATR incidents and accidents in icing conditions as specified under the bilateral airworthiness agreement. So it also throws, they also throw some heat to the FAA. Contributing were, number one, the FAA's failure to ensure that aircraft icing certification requirements, operational requirements for flight into icing conditions, and FAA published aircraft icing information adequately accounted for the hazards. And number two, the FAA's inadequate oversight of the ATR 42 and 72 to ensure continued airworthiness in icing conditions. To me, what really stands out, and again, a testament to that crew, there are no probable causes attributed to the crew.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Zero.
honestly, they didn't know. Like, there's no way you could have looked back and seen
the
that
company
ice
knew.
buildup.
The company knew that it had tendency, so there was no training provided to them because the company didn't share that info.
Well, I can tell you that I can't speak for every airline, but I know that we don't hold with flaps.
Well, and it all came about probably because of this.
Yeah,
one.
and I don't know if that was part of their operations, op specs or FOM or anything like that previously. But I know now, like, we do not hold with flaps.
Well, and 2 years after or a year and a half after the accident, the FAA issued 18 airworthiness directives affecting 29 different turboprop aircraft.
Yeah.
So all about stemming from this one thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I can tell you that turboprops in general tend, especially like the T-tail turboprops, like the King Airs and stuff like that. Like, you got to be careful with those things in icing, because I know that they can be very susceptible to tailplane icing if it's not taken care of. And even with the 121 aircraft, or the Part 65 certified aircraft or whatever, where you've got all your fancy anti-ice and de-ice and everything else. When you're in icing conditions like that, it's really important to recognize it and then try to get out of it.
Yeah, you can't just hold.
I don't stay in icing conditions if we're if it's like a little bit of rime icing. And that's the thing. I think this crew thought it was just light rime because of the pirates that they had been given previously or overheard on the radio. But yeah, there was one time I can tell you that I was in pretty moderate icing conditions going up north. And, we got out of it. We did not stay in those icing conditions.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how much, they have, how much change came about. And I guess all these things are written in blood, and it always is. But American Eagle pretty much moved all the ATRs that they had into warmer weather. Right. That was one of the things, and eventually got rid of them all. And now today, the ATRs are used, but they're used in generally warmer climates. I mean, the one in Brazil, actually, in the news report on this channel that we covered the ATR in Brazil crash, there was somebody who commented like, how could there be icing in the summer? It's like, well, wait a minute, a couple of things.
Hemispheres, guys.
Hemispheres. And also there can be
thing.
icing in the summer. It's at altitude.
There can actually, just depending on
what do you call hail?
Well, yeah, depending on where you're at and the conditions that you're in. Even I got icing the other day, just to let you know. Coming
in August.
Little Rock to DFW. We got
in the south.
We got into icing. We literally got icing conditions. We got the little notification, on our iCast. And so, yeah, we got ice in August going from Little Rock to DFW at like 20, I think it was like 24,000 feet or 25,000 feet.
Yeah.
But I got out of it. Like, we climbed up because we were in the clouds.
But so that was 1994. The ATR 72 implemented a bunch of changes, including extending the boots, to that point where, it had built up. So the ATR 72 is different today than it was on Halloween in 94.
And the knowledge we have now is different.
Yeah. So then for a moment, let's look at the recent crash of the Brazil one in comparison. The plane came down significantly different than the
Yes.
and then the 1994 crash.
Well, and I think that's why it's a really good to pump the brakes on it and
On
say,
the
okay,
icing, yeah.
like let's take a look at the full picture. Obviously, we're not going to know for months, you know,
Right.
what happened. But when we do, I know that there's going to be probably a lot of learning lessons that comes out of it. We don't know what all of the contributing factors were. Just like
Yeah.
with the American Eagle Roselawn crash, we didn't know what all of the contributing factors were until everything was gone through the flight data recorder and the CVR and everything. You just don't know.
Right. And the ATR in Brazil was a flat spin, and that's a term that's bandied about quite a bit. Even in aviation, it's used to just mean an airplane that's basically falling out of the sky but staying horizontal, not tumbling.
Right.
But what it takes to get to a spin is you have to stall the plane first, and everybody is trained not to get there, especially in these twins, a turboprop twin, where your center of gravity is so far back. The further your center of gravity goes back on these planes, the harder it is to maintain stability for your angle of attack and everything else. So, the ATR is going to be tricky in that regard.
Well, and it could have been a mechanical issue too.
Yeah.
Because I know that there was a crash a while back. Gosh, what was it, like Pakistan or something?
Yeah, it's in Nepal.
Yeah,
in
that's
Nepal,
what it was.
that one
Yeah.
wasn't. Well, that wasn't mechanical failure. That one was you had the captain who was flying left seat, a Czech airman playing as her FO, and they were flying into in Nepal. The airport they were going to was a brand new airport, and so it was a familiarization to the airport, and that's why she had a Czech airman for her FO. So she's coming in, she calls for flaps, and he answers back, flaps 15.
Oh, you're talking about that one. No.
That's
talking
an ATR.
Yeah, I'm talking about a different one though.
Oh.
Yeah, there was
there's
another one
yeah,
where
years
it was
before.
like the prop governor or something mechanical actually happened with the prop, which caused a lot of adverse like drag and yaw.
Well, see, that kind of happened in this one.
Oh yeah, no, this was different.
Because instead of the flaps, he had pulled the prop.
Yeah, no.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
this
it's a
was
different
not
one.
the same one. Yeah, this is different. This was actually a mechanical failure, and they were unable to hold altitude, and they kept rolling, and
An ATR.
I think it was an ATR.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
they have had-
It was a turboprop for sure. I can tell
Yeah.
you that for sure. I think it was Pakistan, if I remember correctly. But either way, in that instance, there was no icing, no anything like that. But it was, in fact, a mechanical failure of the propeller. And so, yeah, that's what wound up happening there. And so, like I said, it's really easy to jump on the icing bandwagon. And who knows? It could be
It could be,
icing.
but
It
we
could
just-
absolutely be icing. It's just... I think these discussions are good because it gets people to think. But at the same time, we don't want to jump to any unnecessary conclusions because we might think one thing, jump to that conclusion, and then make all of our decisions moving forward based on that. And then find out later, oh, it was something completely different. Now we have to retrain our thinking, and it's human nature. It's very hard to do that.
Well, and the thing is that sometimes when you jump to early conclusions based on speculation, you can be wrong. The NTSB gets a lot of flack for taking so long, but there was a time in the American Airlines 191 flight in Chicago, the DC-10 that had the engine come off and they rolled.
Yeah.
In that one, like, I don't know, 2 days after, the head of the NTSB investigation does a press conference, holds up a screw and says, here's basically the smoking gun. This is what did it. And it wasn't.
Right.
And now a lot of people still think that was the case.
Well, and that's why I said it goes back to human nature. Once you've formulated an opinion and made up your mind, it's hard to change
Primacy.
it. No, it really is.
Yeah.
It really is. So, but either way, I hope that they're able to get some answers out of the Brazil crash. Just like they were able to get some information. A lot came out of the Eagle crash. A lot of information.
And our friend Joey Johnson, I mean, he was working for Eagle at the time, and he talks about going and training, doing a ton of training in the months after that.
Yeah, I'm sure that they had all the pilots go, and I know that they did. You can find the videos online. They actually went up. They had an ATR 72 sprayed with like yellow spray, and then they did the exact conditions effectively.
And that's how they determine that ridge.
That's how they determine what happened
Yeah.
with the ridge and everything else, and how ice forms based on different flap settings. It was really interesting, but I think they had those pilots, back then, go back through, and the ATR pilots especially, and watch all those videos and go through the
Yeah, I
training
think it was
on
part
that.
of their training. Yeah. Okay, what's the story about the flight attendant that was supposed to deadhead on that flight?
Oh, so apparently, yeah, I heard that there was a flight attendant that had originally got put on that Roselawn flight, but they removed her
Because
and
they're overbooked.
something like that. It was something of that nature. Yeah, they were oversold by one, so they went ahead and just moved her to the flight that was right after that one. And I guess when they landed and they found out what happened, I guess she like fainted because she was like, "Oh my God,"
Yeah, I mean, she could have been there.
That's definitely like a count your blessings type of thing.
And then the same thing in Brazil, we reported in the first 48 hours, I did a news story on it, and I took what information we had, and all the press, everything was saying 62, 62, 62 people. And then come to find out, there were 62 on the manifest, but one guy didn't make it.
Right.
And so
He was actually apparently got to the gate, right? And
Right.
he was like, "Let me on the airplane." He was all upset. Let me on the plane. And of course he missed his flight and had to take another one. I would be.
you and I both,
Love is not the right word.
love is not the word.
Fascinated by
crash investigations. I go back to 191, American Airlines 191, and I had to say American Airlines because Delta 191 is also another big
Correct.
crash.
Yeah.
But which both airlines now, they should never name a flight 191. But the American 191, the captain, he wasn't scheduled for that flight.
Right.
He was done. He had landed Chicago. He was done. He was going to go home, visit, and be with his family when a captain friend of his who really needed off at the gates, caught him and said, "Can you come over to this gate and fly this one flight for me? Please, please, pretty please." And he did it.
Yeah.
So it is amazing.
That's unfortunate. Yeah. I don't know how the original captain, I couldn't imagine what his thought process was after that. But
Yeah, because that's another one where it had nothing to do with the crew. I mean,
right.
they were faced with the unfaceable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sometimes that's what happens. And you never know that's basically what happened with the American Eagle Roselawn crash. And we don't know, it could come to be that way with the Brazil crash as well, but only time will tell. And we take what we can and the knowledge that we're given and we apply it to any adverse circumstances. And that's all you can do.
Yeah. What I take is as a pilot is, if I encounter icing, which I've got a plane that is what they call FICI, flight into known ice capable, is that doesn't mean that I should fly into known ice.
Doesn't mean stay in a known ice.
No, it means I now have a little bit of defense to get out of it as quick as I can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
As Joe Casey, another friend of ours, DP, likes to say, flying in icing conditions makes you a test pilot because you have no idea the aerodynamics of what's becoming.
Physics is crazy.
Yeah.
Physics is absolutely crazy. And sometimes there's, where ice forms, you could get 1 centimeter of ice that just forms perfectly right. That will just ruin your day. And, the thing is that's why it's important to go back and, I don't want to say it's a morbid fascination to look at these air crashes. And, for me, it's more of a fascination of what we learned, what we took away from that instance, because now we know that because the ice formed in this particular way, we don't hold with flaps anymore, especially and so there's just so much to be learned from these situations. And I really hope that that's what can come out of this situation.
All right. Well, thanks, Christy, for shedding some light on that crash and it gives us perspective on the recent crash. Thank you guys for listening, and we appreciate you. If you want to leave a comment on the video, go to the the YouTube page if you're listening on Spotify or something like that, and you can leave comments there. I'd like to thank our sponsors like Colton Mortgage for residential mortgages, coltontakingoff.com, Marshall Protective Services, mpsprotects.com, and Clemens Insurance, clemensinsurance.net. 67 Designs, they make the best camera, tablet, cell phone mounts for your car, plane, or boat. And
Z-Vision,
xevision.com.
We can't forget Flying Eyes.
And we can't forget Flying Eyes. But let me mention something. Z-Vision, I just put some lights on Lola, my 210. It's amazing how bright those things
We're
are.
going to see her from 50 miles away.
Yeah, Z-Vision, xevision.com. .com and Flying Eyes. Use our discount code taking off, all caps, one word, for 10% off at flyingeyesoptics.com. Thank you guys. We'll see you next time. Take care.